But thank you for coming. Jeff and I were coming in, we thought, oh my gosh, it's raining out there. That might dissuade some people from taking the time. But it's nice to see you. We have two candidates for you tonight. I assume that you all got the bio sheets and everything that went out this morning. In fact, the school committee had actually just whittled it down to two candidates yesterday afternoon. So they're kind of hot off the press. At any rate, you will have one come in, and I will ask that person to tell you a little bit about themselves and maybe a little bit of work history, some personal stuff, whatever they feel like sharing, and then we will just open the floor to you. You can ask questions until we get to 7 o'clock, at which point we will transition and bring the other candidate in. I trust that as you came through, you did take a sheet out there, which is really good because the school committee will take all of those sheets with them overnight, and they'll be able to look at them tomorrow in open session. So at HCAM, our regularly scheduled meeting, they actually have to deliberate over the two candidates in open session. So you'll be able to hear some of their thoughts as they make their choice. So I am sure that Kim will be here in just a moment, with whichever candidate is coming in first. I'm not sure which one is.
Will you tell us who they are when they come in?
I surely will, yes. They have been shuffled through the teachers, through the formal interview with the school committee. They've been on a whirlwind tour tonight, so.
Are we able to find out how many people applied for it?
We can share that information with you. I'd have to actually go back to my office maybe and take a look in the queue to see how many were there, so, sure.
Thanks.
And also, if anyone speaks, just please stay behind the microphones because that's how we're filming all this. We just want to make sure that we get everything.
Yes, so I'll have the candidates stand here and speak into this microphone. And if you are going to ask a question, I know it might be inconvenient, but you will have to get up and talk into those microphones. Otherwise, when we're recorded on HCAM, and this is played later for people at home who would like to see the interviews, they won't be able to hear your question. So, all right, Jennifer, come on down. All right, so this is Jennifer Toth. I will simply give you her name. You have her bios, and she can tell you a little bit about herself. And then when you have questions, you can come right up to the microphone. So I'll ask you to stand right here.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jen Toth. I am very interested in the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about my experience and what I might be able to bring to your community in Hopkinton. I am an almost 30-year academic teacher, leader, almost all of it in public school. I've done some time in special ed settings, both committed care settings for students with diverse needs and residential programming. I live in southern Worcester County, and I currently work for a very small rural school district as their pupil services director. I wear a lot of hats in a very small community, so a lot of the things that are of interest to me are related to how do we build community experience for students. So it might be a larger community than I've been accustomed to in terms of the work as a pupil services director, but most of my teaching and leading experience is in larger mill towns with a variety of diverse students, and not just learning profiles, but backgrounds and history. So I want to thank you for coming out. I know it's raining. I didn't expect it to be raining, so I know I'll be doing one of these and running out to the car leader. But I do thank you for coming out, and I hope that I'm able to address questions or concerns from my experience and learn a little bit about your community during this process. So does anybody have a question that they want to start with? Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
I was wondering what your background experience is in special education classrooms, like the front line.
Sure.
You know, what's your background with that, and how do you feel that would prepare you for a leadership role in this community?
Sure, thank you. I started my career as an educator in a residential setting for youth males who could not. It was basically a setting, it was therapeutic as well as funded by the Department of Children and Families, although it wasn't called Department of Children and Families back then, for students who really struggled, and it was the alternative pathway for young men who otherwise would end up in the DYS programming. So I started as an educator and a case manager in that setting. My background in public education is primarily content-driven. I was a high school teacher for 11 years for social studies, but when I joined the district where I spent the vast majority of that time as a new teacher, one of the new teachers who taught right across the hall from me was a special educator. And so a lot of her students were my students, so we hybridized a co-teaching model that was really not what we were doing at the time, but because she had a lot of students that I also worked with. We worked collaboratively to provide supports in the classroom. So I learned very quickly and very young in my career how to modify assignments and how to scaffold, how to break things down, and how to offer programming that met the needs of students at the entry point, and at the same time be able to provide the same level of support, but advance the broaden or deepen the expectations for students who were honors students. So in one particular class, I would have a student who was there auditing the class for experience with his peers, several students who might have been on an inclusion program and may have received modifications or accommodations, and then at the same time having students who were more advanced in the skill set. So I feel as though I wasn't formally trained in special ed at a younger part of my career, earlier part of my career. I had a boots on the ground experience with a phenomenal special educator. When I moved into leadership, one of my responsibilities was to be the 504 coordinator, and so I took a lot of cues from the special education team that worked under me in terms of how do I manage and adopt these systems, what does the evaluation system look like. So even as a leader, I relied on the special education teachers to provide me with support and understanding, and as a result of that, it was a very highly collaborative teacher to administrator relationship. And it was always my passion to help students who struggle. So I moved into committed care settings over the last, I would say there was about a 10-year period of time where I left public ed as a leader and went in and really dug into doing the work of a special educator. I became a special ed liaison and a teacher coordinator for DYS, DMH, and DCF programming through a collaborative. So through them, I earned my special education administrator license, which included coursework in special education. The biggest difference between what I have learned and what I seek to learn in the future, besides the development of additional programs, is I'm not able to assess students. I didn't take those types of programs that are more typical of a traditional path for special education. But I'm in a doctoral program now for special education administration and student support. And so the coursework for that is a very in-depth investigation of the practices of teaching. And I work collaboratively with the people that are now in my current district as a support. I've done a period of time as a coordinator at the elementary level when one of our elementary coordinators left to take a job in another location. So working collaboratively within that team, I've learned a lot about how OT, PT, and speech assessments are done and how they schedule services to meet the needs of students. I feel as though I have a very strong relationship with my team of educators in my current location. There's a lot of give and take, and I have a lot of respect for what they bring to the table. So they're always teaching me something new, and together we're really able to start to grow in a lot of ways that the district that I'm in needed to get to. So in terms of being a special education leader, those areas where I haven't had classroom experience or leadership experience working alongside, that's where all of the other pieces of being a pupil services or a student services director come from. I have a great relationship with community partners. I've done a lot of work. One of the areas of specialty in my master's program was educational law, so I do have a lot of understanding, and I'm a big reader, so I do go back and read the regs all the time whenever something new comes out. Our special education attorney sends it to me, and I'll have a copy of it. I will read it back and forth and ask a lot of questions, because I feel like knowing and understanding gives me an opportunity to forward share information and be more transparent in how we do our work.
Hi, who do you consider to be the thought leaders in this space? And if you could give us a little bit of information about why you chose those certain thought leaders?
Thought leaders in special education?
Or in any related field, whether it be, behavioral, social, emotional, executive functioning, any of those related fields.
I just want to make sure she sat down so she could hear the answer to my question. Honestly, I think there's an awful lot to be said for taking a look at the emotional aspect of student learning, and whether we're talking about emotional intelligence, and we're talking about some of the famous psychologists, or we're talking about social learning theory, and you're talking about Bandura, or we're talking more specifically about practitioners and pragmatic people who've done the work in the field and now are doing the research about it. I think the most important thing is making sure that you go beyond the trends, because everything changes and it comes around again. So it's finding those pieces of the work that really have meaning and support student learning, being open to challenging previous thoughts and practices when something new does come forward. It's if I use the science of reading as an example for literacy instruction, there was a point in time where Fontes and Pinnell was the gold standard for instruction and literacy, and there's a different perspective now. And so I think the expert in the moment has to stand the test of time. But if a program helps with one student's success, then there's some level of validity to the use of that for that student. I think what I prefer to take a look at, rather than the prevailing thinkers, is the work that's done and what students can tell us 10 years from now helped them. And those are the teachers that implement the practices, not so much the resources and the extent to which the fidelity is there. The research will show us that certain practices are better than others, or they're more developmentally appropriate. And I think that is a place where, as a pupil services director, it would be my responsibility to help teachers, help content teachers as well as special educators grow and understand more. But I do think that beyond just whatever the most current research is talking about what did students take away from that? What did they learn from that? How successful were they? And how did the teachers use that in their classroom from one student to the next, differentiating it for the students who needed it? And then finally, finding ways to measure their outcomes in more ways than one, not just one assessment test, but how can students demonstrate in different ways that they can do something, and does it make them comfortable and more successful at the same time? And I think that that's the challenge of so much information and such a quick turnaround in time, is that you have to really think about what is it that you want to do for students, and then what research is out there, what programs are available that allows you to do that.
I have to write this down. I clearly need OT because my writing's terrible. So my son has dyslexia, diagnosed in 3rd grade. And it's been my experience speaking with friends, other parents, that it is wildly across the spectrum. It does not act the same amongst children. I want to know what your experience is dealing with that, and the different approaches you have used in the past or you've seen used, and your successes there. And also, what have you done in your career when you've met opposition for the funding that you know is needed? How have you fought for that?
Okay. I'll address the literacy one first. Dyslexia is a very complex disability diagnosis, and the schools don't refer to it as dyslexia, they refer to it as a specific learning disability. The fact of the matter is that it does present differently with different nuances because it covers more than just reading. It would be easier if you could call out the reading from everything else, but the fact of the matter is that students struggle with a variety of things that come in when we start to learn more by seeing than we do by hearing. And the doing part of it can be delayed by or exacerbated by many other things besides a clinical diagnosis or the conditions that surround the dyslexia itself. So I think you have to look at the student and address the student needs rather than trying to ever define that dyslexia looks like one thing. It's just like autism doesn't look like one thing. So you have to take a look at the student's learning profile, and different students will be assessed in different ways. It's not enough to say that they do well in their classrooms and they seem to understand everything so that there isn't a need. It's really taking a deeper look at where is the need then. And sometimes it's not about the skill set that they have or don't have or are building. It's sometimes about the anxiety or the emotional connection they have to getting started or getting finished, or the lack of pacing with their peers and the concern that they're not going to catch up. So I think you have to take a look at beyond what dyslexia is for that student and try to address those pieces that help them feel more confident so that they can take the risks even if they're slower. To the part where you asked about like what have we used and what have I found to be successful. We started in my current district. We had an initiative before COVID to advance literacy opportunities for students using a variety of resources. COVID interrupted that, and so when we came back to fully in person in the district and I was there, we started with working with a company called Crafting Minds, and we had the opportunity to use some of our ARPA money, our ESSER money, to bring in a training for any of the teachers who wanted to volunteer. So we had a combination of content teachers at the first and second grade level, special educators K to 12. We had some paraprofessionals that came in. We invited anybody who was going to work with students who needed assistance and support to read, interventionists, and we did a 10-hour, 5-week program, and we gave feedback on what is the current science, what does dyslexia look like, what are the different aspects of testing and assessment. And I would say that training was foundational for us in terms of being able to have better conversations. We also stopped saying we're not going to write dyslexia on an IEP. We said instead we can include it if you have the clinical diagnosis. We're going to take a look at the situations that surround your child's struggle in school, and that's an SLD, but we can work with you with that. But I think some of it is really about talking about, it's not about treating a disability, it's about working with a student. And so different things work for different students. We have a couple of teachers who came to our district OG trained, but our district primarily uses Wilson. And we have a strong partnership with between the elementary and the middle high school that they do a lot of collaborative training together. And as we bring new teachers in, we find ways to use grant money to provide them with the opportunities to be trained in either the Wilson program, or in some cases, if we see that we might want to have a different type of training, if we have a teacher who expresses interest, we would consider having them learn another methodology, because at the end, different things work for different students. The funding sources, I do find that funding can come from various places. Sometimes you have to be creative. Sometimes you have to reach out to that company that produces that book and say, can you give me 10 so we can try them? We tie all of our summer grant money into some sort of early literacy program, and we invite any student who has intervention, any student on an IEP who doesn't qualify for summer services through special ed, and we make it accessible to them to the extent that they're able to make it during the time that we offer it. So we combine a reading kickoff and a math program, and we make sure that students who are interested in having those services and parents who can get them to our programs have the opportunity to access those K to 5. And sometimes we catch kids or capture kids there, and then they don't need any additional supports. and when we find that we have a need, we dedicate funds and that we plan mindfully. We look at what we want to do and we follow through in a training program to fidelity. So there might be things that I'll say, if we want to filter this, what are we willing to give up to do it? Because sometimes you just have to say, this is the important piece. These others are also important, but this one is the one that we're going to focus on and become really great at. So I look for other sources, but in the end, if they're not available, we really focus our spending and our budget on those initiatives that we feel will reach the most students, whether they're special education students or not.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is more, a little bit more simplistic as far as, I'm just wondering what your approach is as far as fostering sort of a collaborative team approach with your staff. So whether that's PTOT speech, whether that's learning specialists, I'm just wondering what your approach is to working with those professionals, as far as like how frequently are you meeting with them? What do those meetings look like? Is it a collaborative sort of discussion? Are you going into those settings and observing those sessions and seeing kind of what those providers and specialists are doing? And just kind of how you really work with your staff to really foster that team approach.
Sure. Not being sure of how the organizational structure is, of who responds to who and who's the direct supervisor of who. I can say that I've had a somewhat different experience over the years in terms of the extent to which I take the driver's seat in some of that, and I share that responsibility, or I kind of I advise in that responsibility. I think sometimes it's very different, but I do believe in a highly collaborative relationship where anybody should feel like they can come and ask me a question about something that concerns them as it relates to students and programs. Sometimes it's I'm sorry that, that's not a place where we can go right now, but most of the time it's, if you have a question, come in and let's talk about it. I'm in early, in part because my commute currently requires that I avoid Worcester traffic. So I'm in early so I can kind of capture some of those teachers who come in early as well, and we have conversations. A lot of times I'll pull job alikes from the different buildings, and we'll sit and we'll have a conversation about what are the big ticker things in their department, in their area. I am a cooperating supervisor for any first, second, or third year special educator or specialist. So any of the people that work under the hat or the umbrella of special education, if they're brand new to the district, I do participate in the observation and evaluation process for them. And then to the extent that the principals and I collaborate, there might be some others that they take on more responsibility for than I do. But I always believe in feedback first, so before I ever observe them, I would go in and first ask them when I can come in to see something, and then go through the process of saying, okay, now let's talk about some of the things that you did. And I think a lot of the feedback that I can provide to the team is to be more like a team, and to ensure that some of the things that are very specific and particular to their areas of expertise, I don't know them all. I know what good teaching practices look like, but the nuances and how do you work with the student, where did they come from, I allow them to teach me more about the students and the profile and what they use. They have an active hand in collaborating for purchasing items that will support programs for students at different grade levels. And we try to figure out together, how do we address some of the common concerns that we have, whether it's professional etiquette at an IEP meeting, or it's how do we communicate better with families up front so that they aren't confused or worried or nervous, because many times the first time a parent talks with a special educator is when something's not quite right. And so what does that mean? What does that look like? Being able to communicate, how to communicate that with families, I think is important. And then finally, making sure that they feel as much that they belong as any other member of the educational team. Finding ways to give back to them what they need. Being able to kind of rein in some of never shutting down pie in the sky, or couldn't we at least do this? But really talking about what that looks like realistically and how long that would take in order to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction versus 15, 20 people moving in 15, 20 different directions. And then finally, as a leader, it's my job to make sure they're successful. And if they need help or they're struggling, to model what I would expect them to do with a student who struggles. I believe that special educators put advocacy for their students ahead of, in many cases, advocacy for themselves. And so sometimes that's a struggle, that at the end of the day, they are more tired or more emotionally in a place where they want to be able to do more. And so by listening to that and talking about it and finding ways to be able to do that, that supports students, that communicates more effectively with families, and that allows them to be a comprehensive team. And if they feel that and they're successful in that, then I've done a good job. Come on up. Hi.
What is your opinion on, now that we have new testing for dyslexia or language-based learning disabilities and different requirements for schools currently, that's kind of new in the pipeline? What's your opinion on sub-separate language-based learning classrooms?
So when you're talking about testing and screening for dyslexia, you're talking about the universal screeners that the state of Massachusetts has a mandate. I'm a big fan of more than compliance. I don't necessarily have a best practice for language-based instructional classrooms that are sub-separate, because I do believe in some cases at critical periods, some of the ways in which students learn require that they be in a setting where they're learning from other students, other peers. And so having them be able to partner in situations where they may struggle and others might be strong, they also have talents that they can give to those other students and provide a collaborative learning environment. I would say that if this district or a particular school or grade level in this district had a need for a program like that, I would want to do a thorough investigation, talk about the ways in which the current settings aren't meeting the needs of students, and could we first do that? So that we have more opportunities for students to be educated alongside their typical peers. If that wasn't something that was successful, then I would want to have a group of people that was more than just a grade level or a school's staff members, to be part of that bigger conversation, talk about what that looks like. It has budgetary implications, it has physical plant implications, it has day-to-day operations and management of building implications. It's not just my decision. So I would say that if the conditions were necessary and the situations arose where there was the ability not only to service a group of students, but then adopt programming that is sustainable, because you want to have something that can be maintained over time, and the needs of the students may shift, but it's really hard to piecemeal a program where you might need it for a year and then you don't need it for 5. And so really being good at it, being mindful at it, planning and programming for anything that you do with a student with a special need, if it's going to meet the needs of a larger group of students, then that's a collaborative conversation between parents, school-based individuals and professionals, and the district level office, because that's an investment that shouldn't be taken lightly and shouldn't happen quickly. It should happen with some level of speed and efficiency, but it shouldn't be an overnight decision, because it really has to be what's in the best interest of students for a longer period of time than just in that moment.
So I think we have time for one more question.
Hi.
So kind of to piggyback off of that, and I know we keep talking about dyslexia and SLDs, you know, it is a big cohort of students in our district that are underserviced. But on top of that, with all the students in the district and the new legislation that could potentially be coming in the next couple of years with evidence-based reading versus leveled reading.
Sure.
Our current district has leveled reading, and so I guess I'm just curious your thoughts on and knowledge on that legislation that's going to be coming, forcing all schools in the district to potentially switch over from leveled reading to evidence-based reading, and just maybe some of your background knowledge on that, because that affects all students.
It does. You're absolutely right. And I think that that's ultimately, don't we want universal opportunities for all students to benefit from the things that were previously or initially identified for students who struggle? if students don't struggle in that way, we can deepen or broaden their experiences in other ways. The legislation is something that I follow. It is something that, because it's a work in progress, just like many things are in special ed, I appreciate that the state of Massachusetts takes its time. It listens to CPACs, it listens to organizations. This new IEP project that they talk about was, it was a labor of many, many years and lots of stakeholders. And so they don't do things they don't pivot quick. And in some cases that might be frustrating, but really when they're gonna take a look at a mandate for students' support, there is some real mindfulness to it. So in the work that I do with our teachers, we deal with a lot of early literacy. We do pilot programs, pilot materials in our summer programs. We have an ELA coordinator who does all of the DIBELS and Ames Web testing, both for language, for literacy, and for math. So I work collaboratively with her. She's located at the elementary school, and we do DIBELS progress monitoring for all students K to 5 3 times a year. And we do use that data to inform instruction. In terms of the evidence-based reading, it would, and I don't mean to diminish the capacity of the importance of decodables or other types of evidence-based instructional resources and materials. But anytime the state of Massachusetts adopts a new curriculum framework, somebody comes out with a book the next day. And it's not tested, it's not tried, that's why I believe in doing a lot of pilots and having teachers who are going to run the programs try them out with the students with whom they might fit, because it takes 2 to 3 years sometimes to, one, realize the true net worth and the true value of the work with those materials and resources for students, and it takes some time for the teachers to become effective practitioners with it. So I would say if there are things that our staff, I trust them, they're the experts. I am not the literacy specialist or the most well-versed in those things, but I learn very quickly, and I listen more than I talk about those things, because they are the experts. And if they tell me we want to go in that direction, then again, collaboratively with the rest of the people who would be responsible for implementing that. I do think that those are things that kind of spread out rather than trickle down or up. They spread out to other places. And as teachers, both special education teachers and content or grade level teachers, receive similar PD, then they can practice things with fidelity in the same or in similar ways with multiple students. Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. I know it's pouring. I appreciate it. It's late at night in the middle of the week. And I hope that the sun comes out tomorrow and you have a wonderful long weekend. Thank you again. It was wonderful to spend some time with you. Thank you.
Terrific. I'll do the best I can.
All right, everyone, so this is Abigail Hanscom. It appears she likes to be called Abby because I introduced her as Abigail before, and she said, "Hi, I'm Abby." So she will do the same. She will tell you a little bit about herself, maybe professionally and personally, and then the floor is open to you to ask all kinds of questions. Just as a quick reminder, if you did not get one of those sheets in the back to give feedback to the school committee, we can make sure that you get one before you leave, okay? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Abby. Nice to meet you, and thank you for coming out. I very much appreciate it on a rainy night. And we have someone who's like a constituent of the school system, perhaps doing her homework, so thank you very much for doing that. It's very thoughtful. I wanted to just take a quick minute and fill you in a little bit about who I am as a candidate, as well as kind of just share with you a little bit about my philosophy as it relates to inclusion. So my name's Abby Hanscom, and I have worked for the past 29 years in Massachusetts special education. So I started my career at the Hemingway Elementary School as a Learning Center teacher, K-5, and that was a wonderful preparation to become a special educator because you got a little bit of everything across all the grade levels. And then my life changed and I moved, and so I ended up working in the Newton Public Schools for 13 years in a variety of positions. I started as a curriculum specialist for inclusive practices. So thinking about going out into general education classrooms and speaking with classroom teachers about accommodations, modifications, and implementing IEPs in classroom settings when that was appropriate. So I did that, and then an entire wave of young people with autism emerged, and Massachusetts started an autism specialist program, and so I was like the first autism specialist for the Newton Public Schools, and I did that, got that started, and then had a couple of children who are now 16 and about to be 19. And then transitioned to administration full-time. So I worked in a middle school as the assistant to the principal for student services, so the special education building-based administrator, the Charles E. Brown Middle School in Newton. It's one of 4 middle schools that feed to 2 large high schools. And then I moved up, and for the last 4 years I was there, I was the assistant director of special education for Newton, and my purview was to support the administrators who were the lead special ed administrators in the 4 middle schools and the 2 high schools, so the 6 through 12 range, which was approximately 6,000 kids at that time. In addition to that, I happen to live here, so it's nice to see, townsfolk. And I shop mostly on the Westboro side of town. I live over by Lake Whitehall. But we've lived here for 6 years, and we moved here for the excellence of the school system. So this is, something perhaps we have in common, is that we made a big change in our lives when our kids were in 5th and 7th grade and decided that Huffington was the place to come. So we did that. And then finally, I'm a consumer of the special education services here as a parent, and I have experience on both sides of the table. For better, for worse. And I share that with you openly and respectfully, and I know this is a recorded conversation, but I do that out of respect, as well as honesty, that's been our journey, as a family. So with that, I open it up to questions, and I'm happy to kind of jump around and answer them in whatever order makes sense for you guys.
Ma'am, if you could just stay behind the microphone so
Oh,
we can get everything
really?
you're saying.
Okay. That's a bummer. All right, I'll try my best. Sorry about that if I've.
It's all good, thank you.
Yeah, you just let me know.
And if you are going to ask a question again, please use the microphone, because otherwise we won't have you recorded.
I asked this last time too. And I have to look at my chicken scratch to remember how I did it. I have a son with dyslexia. I have friends with kids with dyslexia. When we talk about it, none of our experiences are the same. It manifests so differently for all these kids. So I'm wondering how you would manage that. How you would, my son, when he looks at words, they dance. But or that's what he tells me, that's the only way he can tell me, when other kids see them, they do flip, or they just can't get them to come together. So my first question is, what would you use to help so many kids with this same learning disability? How would you help them all? What have you used with success? And then what do you do when you know that a district needs a certain program that they don't have, but we're told we don't have the funding, but you know these kids need it? How do you solve that problem? And thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna try and remember all the parts and tell me if I.
shout it out.
Yeah, thank you, excellent. So I have a lot of personal experience with dyslexia, and I can tell you I have, experienced the trajectory of a student from kindergarten again, elementary school, middle school, high school, and now about to go off to college. And so my experience is that in general, every person's kind of dyslexia is unique to them, and it has a lot to do with kind of how your brain is wired and your personal kind of learning trajectory, right? So that is just true, and that is actually probably a good thing, because what it does is it makes the school system really have to tailor instruction. And so that goes to the data about rate of progress. When we think about the trend of a student's progress line, we always want to see positive growth, and we want to see a rate of progress that is commensurate with that student's capacity, right? And for some kids, that progress takes a long time, like 5 years, 6 years, and I would not want to be overly sunshiny about that path. It's hard, right? But the reality is that students can learn to decode, they can learn to encode, they can learn to write with lots of strategies through multisensory, phonetic instruction for the most part, and certainly there are visualizing and verbalizing techniques that for some kids are an alternate pathway that also work, sometimes in place of or together. But that if you can stay with it and be consistent over time, kids can kind of consolidate that skill set. And if they're in front of highly qualified general ed teachers for content instruction, come out with decoding and tap back into the content areas that are so wonderful in a public school system like this. So I try to build programming that provides for the best of both worlds. Small group or very, very dyadic, individualized instruction when needed in specially designed curriculum, at the same time as maintaining access to the content areas as much as possible. My own experience is that many students with dyslexia are excellent listeners and absorbers of information in the world because they've lived in a text-free environment longer than some other people have. And they know what to do, right? And they're curious and they're smart and they're capable. And so I really believe strongly in a balanced approach that definitely is based in the science of reading, and I'm just going to say that out to you because I believe in phonetic instruction as like a methodology, but doesn't give short shrift to comprehension work. So the point of learning how to decode is to enjoy reading text. And the way you enjoy reading text is to read good text. And that's where the comprehension stuff comes right in, and then balanced literacy, is a lovely methodology when you have kids who can decode. So that's how I think about it. Did we do all your parts? Did I forget any parts? Okay.
I distracted her.
Oh, sorry.
She always does. No, just, yeah, have you run,
Budget was last part.
Yeah.
thank you so much. Have you run up across,
Yes.
budget
Yes.
heights and how
Yes. So what I would tell you is that my belief system, right, is that the special ed regulations are our guiding principles. So I work from a very deep investment in understanding what FAPE and the LRE, uniquely tailored for each individual child, looks like. And so I have to be honest that what makes my job interesting is figuring that out over and over and over again. So there are certainly methodologies that I'm sure the school district has invested mightily in that are very appropriate. And there may be ones that are new or developing or coming back into fashion, right, that we may also need to look at. I build budgets that are directly linked to IEP goals and objectives, and that I can articulate to the public why I'm asking for funding. I don't do it on methodologies that are the fun thing du jour. I don't do it on things that don't have research base. And I don't do it on things that people maybe hear about on the internet and decide they want, right? So I want to be honest with you, we would have very upfront, clear conversations about the intention and the purpose of a methodology, and certainly if it's sound and a good investment for the district and lots of kids can benefit, then that always goes in the favor of finding funding to do the right thing. Is that helpful?
Yeah, can I have one?
Go for it.
What if there are, you know, this little teeny population of kids that are still struggling, no matter, you know, you've given them a small group, you've fought for them, you've done so much, and they are still struggling and they do need something else, then where do we go from there?
Well, so the continuum of services is built as a continuum for a reason. So we work our way through both restrictiveness as well as like specially designed instruction. So there may be methodologies that only 1 or 2 kids need to access, right? Sometimes that's true. I also have experience in other methodologies, not just in dyslexia, where a student may benefit for a while from something and then it loses its potency and you have to go find a new thing, and that's real. Or a student's neurological profile changes, maybe the evolution of a seizure disorder or a med change, and suddenly you're looking at a whole set of things that used to work that don't work as well anymore. So data is very important.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hello. I'd like to know what your relationship is like with your CPAC, how frequently you meet, if it's an important organization, how they typically advise your choices and decision making, and just kind of the vibe y'all have. I'd like to know that.
Great. Thank you. So I love our CPAC, and one of the things that I think will be saddest about leaving my current district is that over 12 years we've worked really hard to first revitalize and then build out an organization that now runs entirely on its own, and really we're providing logistic support, financial connection, publicity, things like that, right? So I'm in the stage where I have a fully fledged, highly functional advocacy organization that is not antagonistic in any way to the school system and is a tremendously respected body in terms of advocacy. So what that looks like is, so I attend all the CPAC meetings, so I've been to, 120 CPAC meetings in the last 12 years, not here with you guys, but in another place. And in some of those, we're providing the speaker, and in other times, the speaker's coming through from the CPAC network and other connections and interests, so it's a mix. We're meeting all the required things that CPACs have to do, but then we're trying to really go beyond that. So in the last couple of years, I've worked really hard to help the CPAC to develop the confidence to advocate for real, right? So what that means is you have to kind of follow the budget process. You might have to have a member who goes to every school committee meeting and sits there and listens month after month to the process to understand how a particular budget is built. We provide probably annually an opportunity where the CPAC co-presidents kind of come to school committee and formally present. And that's not a presentation that I build for them or oversee or edit. That's their genuine advocacy. And then I also do a prep on the budget. So prior to the public release of the budget, like one day before, I, with the superintendent's permission, explain all the pieces in advance so people aren't taken by surprise. Months before that, I seek input from the CPAC on what they see as holes in the programming, what they're hearing, and if there were a wish list of things to be incorporated into the budget. So I do all of those things in the context of a financial reality that is true. And so I take both the political and social impact of school budgeting very seriously. And I never want one subgroup of kids to be left behind in the budget or to be seen as the scapegoat topic for budgetary dynamics. And so I would anticipate having very honest conversations with the CPAC leadership so that the messaging is consistent and is joined with the school system so that we can together advocate for resources that we both agree are appropriate. So that's kind of what I do all the time. Sure. It's very dramatic.
I walk down the aisle. Rain-soaked and looking good. So I heard that your experience is in autism, and I'm an old school SLP, been one for a while, and I'm just wondering how your thinking about neurodiversity has evolved over time, or if you consider it something that's an internet flash in the pan, or if you see it as something that holds value, given that now we have feedback from adults. And can tell us really what we used to do as best practice has affected them as adults, and how you see that shaping programming here in Hopkinton. And then I have another question that's not really related at all, but as an SLP, I'm just going to advocate for my fellow SLPs and others that aren't teachers, and how you see providing them training that is specific to their field, be it, working counselors who are working with kids with anxiety. The SEI training is great. They already know all of that. They've got a master's degree. So they need higher level training. Speech therapists need work with skills that aren't going to be covered in general. So I'm just wondering how you advocate for getting the training for specialized staff so that they can grow and not just be the turnkey people that go and say, here's what we should do, but can actually grow in their specific field. So two totally separate. But
they are totally separate. So remember question 2 if I forget it by the end of question 1. So broadly speaking, I do want to say, one of my most favorite things that I get to do outside of my job is I am a member of the Mass Council for Exceptional Children, which is the leading professional organization for special education professionals in Massachusetts, and I'm on our state board. So right now I'm the treasurer, which is very stressful to me personally, but I'm trying hard. And as part of our board, we seek out self-advocate board members, and the power of being on a board and working alongside adults with disabilities who have experienced the services provided by staff in our field has fundamentally changed really how we think about this professional organization, but also the work in schools. So in the autism community, there is a critique amongst adults with autism that certain methodologies that school systems endorsed were coercive or otherwise disrespectful to their experience. And so that is a pendulum that is swinging right now in our practice, and is critically important and very, very important. And broadly speaking, I would just, to answer your question, say, we're hearing from a segment of the adult population of folks who can tell us their experience, and there's a much larger percent of the population of folks who cannot, or choose not to, frankly, too. And so I'm very aware of that, and I have to say I probably come down more on the neurodiversity side of the labeling wars, because those are just made up labels to facilitate a process that's very bureaucratic, and kids didn't get the memo. Babies didn't get the memo that they have a particular label, and they are who they are, right? So I think I understand your kind of larger question, and would say that in my decision making, I bring a lens that I think of as an equity lens, frankly, to the disability process that's rooted in civil rights, as well as in this idea of listening to adults with disabilities tell us what they need. So that was question 1. SLP, professional development.
Just people who aren't teachers.
Everybody else, professional development, yeah. Yeah, so I can articulate what I'm familiar with doing, and broadly speaking, the pandemic was a little helpful to us in this way. So when we were not fully in person, all of our PD stayed virtual for quite a while. And what that did force us to do is go out and look at every subgroup of employees in the school system and figure out access for ongoing PD. So for speech and language, we're using a number of very high quality PD that's online, where there's libraries of ASHA certified speech experiences, and we buy a membership for everybody in the district, and that's the PD offering paid for by the district. as opposed to onesie conferences that I don't feel have as much of a return on the investment. Now that the onesie conferences are back, we're going back to like a mix, right? So if there is a conference, so Michelle Garcia Winter's coming back to Boston, I got immediately flooded with requests. You know, we'll identify a couple train the trainer folks who haven't gone yet, invest in that, and then anticipate that that's coming back through a job-alike model for PD. And job-alike is where everybody with the like job is meeting on a consistent basis and both self-supervising but also experiencing PD together. So that's kind of what we do. Job type by job type by job type. I also have some onesie kind of practitioners in my small town. I'm 3,000, a little bit smaller than here. And for individual people, we make PD plans that are specific to their needs, orientation and mobility, teacher of the visually impaired, braille, instruction, things like that. Yep. It cracks me up when you raise your hand. I don't know if I'm supposed to say like, okay,
So I wanted to ask the other candidate this, but I didn't get a chance. But my question is it seemed like this past winter, and you being a Hopkinton resident probably saw a lot of what was going on with budget and CPAC and special education and all that. So I'm delighted to hear that you have a great relationship with your current CPAC, and that is really encouraging. I guess I'm wondering what you will implement moving forward with our CPAC, and some of the members are here, and how you will bridge that relationship. I think the school committee is doing a good job, and Dr. Kavanaugh is also doing a good job of trying to bridge that relationship moving forward. But I think a lot of times this winter, CPAC, and if I'm speaking out of turn, you guys can tell me, but I think CPAC felt a little unheard, and I think parents felt unheard. And so how are you going to foster those relationships? How are you going to open your door? Maybe not necessarily even to just CPAC, but to other parents that have concerns. It felt like the door was a little bit closed this winter, and trying to maybe bridge those gaps.
Yeah, so I'm sorry it felt that way. And I think sometimes we confuse listening and hearing people with like total agreement on all things, right? And so I guess what I would say is, as a social worker, I have a skill set around listening and trying really hard to hear what people are really asking and wanting, frankly, and being able to restate it back and check for clarity, right? And then be honest about the parts I feel like I can do in the now and the parts that maybe I can't do at all or can work towards. And so I kind of live my whole career like that, where I basically just go day by day and month by month, and in collaboration with CPAC and parents who are not in CPAC, because not everybody's comfortable joining CPAC, right? So there's this other piece of building the membership and really allowing the organization to get to everybody it needs to get to. Trying to open those lines of communication and keep them open even when it's really hard or when we're in disagreement. So I do that, and I talk like this all day long, so I just want you to prepare yourself if it's annoying, I'm sorry. But I also try very hard to find what we have in common and work from there forward, as opposed to fixate on what we are in disagreement on and just spin around on that. So I've been told in the past that that's like unrelentingly positive and challenging, like Ted Lasso, right? And I have heard that feedback and reflected on that as part of my personal style. So I know that. But I also genuinely believe that, parents were the force that created special ed. Like, let's just be clear. Kids were excluded from public school. There was a mechanism through the civil rights movement where we created special education. The field has been around less time than I've been alive, right? And so it's just incomprehensible to me that school districts and parents can't partner, right? It doesn't make any sense. And it seems like the kids benefit when we do. So that's what I do. And then I'm very honest. When we're in disagreement, I just say, I'm not beating around the bush. This is just how I feel about this. This is why I do it. And I'm comfortable with dispute resolution and alternative dispute resolution. And I believe in the process very, very much.
Hi.
Hi.
You did state that your current CPAC is a tremendously respected body, which I need you to know that your CPAC speaks very highly of you.
Thank you.
And we only found out that you were a candidate, I think it was 9:30 this morning, and within an hour or two, we had a response from your CPAC. So that
Good.
actually does show the respect goes both ways, which is very exciting for me. I have a submitted question from a parent who wasn't able to make it tonight. Many Hopkinton parents with children who have learning disabilities are often having to hire advocates to attend team meetings to get FAPE for their children. How would you propose a change to the culture so that parents are seen as contributors to the team?
Oh, it's an excellent question, person who submitted it, so thank you. So I'm going to answer that in two pieces. So the first, I'm just going to answer it personally, and then I'm going to tell you kind of the technical answer. But so I have had that experience where I have been at a team meeting and I have had someone tell me something that I do not believe, and I have had to have the guts to say I do not think that's right, even though I'm very afraid that they're going to like retaliate against me. Right? I've been in that moment, and I do this job all day long. And I want to say that what I've done over the years is had friends come with me to team meetings so I could be a mom and not my job. And it's been very helpful to me to lean on people to do that for me, or even just to take notes, right? And to debrief with me on the car ride home. Say, like, did you really mean to say that? Is that what you heard? Did I hear that? So I don't want to disparage the value of having someone come for that purpose. There's a different other purpose if a person a parent is feeling like they're not being respected as a team member and their input isn't being included, and you have to hire someone to give your input, right? Which I believe is really the nub of your question. So what I would say is that there are very limited times when I think advocates are really helpful. They restate things, they are an independent third person who says things that is perhaps easier to hear for the district and perhaps for the family. So there is a place for advocacy. However, if writ large, a parent isn't feeling heard at the team meeting, that's a different issue, and the advocate isn't going to be able to solve that. That's really between the school system and the family to really reach out and understand why that's happening and honestly see what we can do to fix it. So there are a couple things you can do, right? Sometimes you can engage in facilitating processes for IEP meetings that are helpful. There's like guided scripts so that everybody does their part and it's a little less emotional. You can sometimes change the venue, change the structure, do things in a more relaxed way. You can bring in a support person to lead the meeting who maybe is a mutual support person from the previous school, things like that. So there are actions, but usually it's going to come down to what the proposal is and if that proposal feels authentic to the parent. And I think for that, people just have to be able to communicate honestly without a lot of emotion, and be able to hear if a parent says, I don't feel respected, and be able to be humble and apologize if that is happening, and also say, here's our proposal, we need you to, respond to it, right? And we'll take it from there. So that's kind of how I would do it, and I would talk just like this in the team meeting, and I would certainly model for the administrators and team chairs that it's okay to say, like, I'm not sure, I'll look into that. I don't really know the answer. You've taken me by surprise by saying that. Let me find out more. And not kind of have to march through a script if that's not what's really happening in the room at that moment. So, hope that's helpful. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for coming out in the rain, you guys. Thank you. Awesome. Have a good night, okay? It's been lovely to meet you, and good luck with your whole big process. It's going to be great. You're my senior. Yes, yes. All right. No. Oh, no. This is. Thanks so much. All right, I too will thank everyone for coming out tonight. Please
Please leave your feedback forms. As I said earlier, the school committee will be reviewing them before tomorrow night. And also, please remember that tomorrow night, the school committee does deliberate in open session. So that will be the time when the school committee will pick the successor and the next director of student services here in Hopkinton.